Nobody leaves my tables hungry. She said it quietly. No drama, no audience. Just a tired woman reaching into her own pocket, the same pocket that was supposed to keep her lights on, and pulling out everything she had left. 5 strangers. 1 storm. $59 she couldn't afford to give, and yet she gave it anyway. What happened next shook an entire community to its core, and nobody saw it coming. Not the bikers, not the town, and certainly not Emily Carter. If this story moves you, subscribe to this channel and drop your city in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The storm came in fast that Tuesday evening. Not the slow rumbling kind that gives you time to prepare. The kind that drops without warning, turns the highway dark in 30 seconds, and sends everything loose skidding across the asphalt. Emily Carter had been on her feet for 11 hours. She wasn't counting anymore. She had stopped counting hours the way she had stopped counting a lot of things. How many times she'd reheated her own coffee? How many times she'd smiled at a customer who didn't smile back? How many times she had looked at her phone calculating whether the electric bill could wait another 4 days or just 3? The Sunset Grill wasn't the kind of place people dreamed about working. It sat on the edge of Route 66 outside Kingman, Arizona, a diner that had seen better decades with a neon sign that buzzed on the letter S, so it read Unset Grill most nights. The booths were cracked vinyl. The ceiling fan in the back wobbled like it was deciding whether to stay attached. The coffee was strong because everything else about the place was weak. But Emily Carter showed up every single day. She showed up because she had a son named Tyler, 16 years old, already talking about skipping college because he didn't want to be a burden. She showed up because the rent didn't care about her feelings. She showed up because she was 44 years old, freshly divorced, after 18 years of marriage to a man who had quietly drained their joint account before he left. And she had decided a long time ago that self-pity was a luxury she couldn't afford. She moved between tables the way she had for 7 years. Fast, efficient, a notepad tucked into her apron, reading people before they even opened their mouths. She could tell a truck driver from a tourist by the way they sat. She could tell who was going to tip and who wasn't. She could tell who was eating their first real meal in 2 days and who was just passing through. She was rarely wrong. So, at 7:14 p.m., the front door opened. The bell above it barely made a sound against the noise the wind was throwing at the building. But Emily looked up. She always looked up when the door opened, a habit built from years of working alone during slow shifts when a new customer meant the difference between a decent night and a dead one. 5 men walked in. They were big, road-worn, the kind of tired that doesn't come from one long day, but from several long days stacked on top of each other. Their jackets were dark with rain. Their boots left water on the linoleum. 2 of them were older, silver in their beards, deep lines around their eyes. The other 3 were younger but carried themselves with the same heavy, deliberate weight that told Emily these weren't men in a hurry. She clocked the patches on their jackets immediately. Everybody in Arizona knew those patches. Hell's Angels. She heard the shift in the diner without turning around. 2 women in the corner booth went quiet. A man sitting alone at the counter stiffened slightly. The young cook Darnell appeared in the pass-through window for exactly 2 seconds before disappearing again. Emily didn't tighten. She didn't change her expression. She grabbed 5 menus, walked straight toward them and said, "Go ahead and take the big booth in the back. More room." The man who came in first, tall, broad-shouldered, a gray beard, trimmed close eyes that had seen things they hadn't forgotten, looked at her for a moment, not the way men sometimes looked at her, differently, measuring something. "Appreciate that," he said. His voice was low and flat, not unfriendly, just worn down. She led them to the booth, set the menus down, and pulled out her notepad. "Coffee while you decide." "Yeah," said the tall man. "All around, black." She poured 5 cups without being asked again. She gave them space. That was something she had learned. Early men who looked like they were carrying something didn't need someone hovering. They needed a moment to breathe before they were ready to be people again. She worked the other tables, refilled a couple of waters, dropped a check at the corner booth, and watched from the corner of her eye. They weren't talking much. One of the younger men had his hands folded on the table, staring down at them. Another one was looking out the rain-streaked window at nothing in particular. The tall man who had spoken sat with his arms crossed, not reading the menu, just sitting inside whatever was sitting inside him. When Emily came back, she didn't rush the order. "You ready or you need a minute?" "We're ready," the tall man said. They ordered simply burgers, a couple of plates of eggs and toast. One of the older men asked if the soup was homemade. Emily told him it wasn't, but it was good. He ordered it anyway. She put the ticket in herself. She didn't ask Darnell to rush it. She just told him when he looked at her, "Take care of these guys." He nodded and didn't say anything else. 20 minutes later, she set the plates down one by one. She noticed the way they ate, not fast, careful, like men who understood the value of a hot meal because they had gone without one recently. The younger man who had been staring at his hands looked up when his plate arrived, and for just a moment, just a flicker, she saw something shift in his face. Gratitude or something close to it that he quickly tucked back away. She refilled the coffees without being asked. When the tall man looked up at her the second time, she said, "You all doing all right?" He paused. Something crossed his face, not quite an answer. "We buried our brother today," he said, quiet, even, like he was reporting it rather than feeling it, because feeling it was something he was saving for later when he was alone. Emily stopped. Not dramatically, not visibly really, but inside something shifted. "I'm sorry," she said. And she meant it in the way that people mean it when they actually are, not as a reflex, not as a pleasantry, but as a real human acknowledgement that something terrible had happened to someone sitting right in front of her. The man nodded once, short, accepting. "Long drive back," he said. Where are you been marrying in Phoenix? Then some of us split off to Flagstaff. That's another hour and a half, at least, 2 in this weather." "Yeah," she left him to finish. She was standing at the register when the tall man came up. He set down his credit card without looking at her directly, just placed it on the counter and waited. She ran it. It came back declined. She tried it again. Same result. He didn't react visibly, but she watched his jaw set, just slightly. The kind of movement that happens when a man is absorbing something he was already half expecting and is deciding right now in real time how to handle it with dignity. "Try this one," he said, and produced a second card. She ran it, declined. He looked at her then, really looked at her. And in that look was something that Emily Carter recognized instantly. Not because she had seen it on bikers or on men twice her size, but because she had seen it in her own mirror. The particular expression of someone who has been reduced against their will to depending on the mercy of a stranger. "The chapter put everything into the funeral," he said. His voice was steady, but the words cost him. "Gas, travel arrangements. I thought I had enough on this card to cover dinner. I was wrong, I apologize." He reached back into his jacket. "Let me see what the guys have." "Wait," Emily said. He stopped. She looked at the check, $59.14. She looked at the register. She looked at the 5 men behind him, some of them already pushing back from the booth, already aware that something was happening, already preparing to pull whatever they had left. She looked at the receipt one more time. Then she reached into her own apron pocket and pulled out 3 $20 bills. "Put your money away," she said. He stared at her. "Ma'am, my name's Emily." She placed the money in the register herself. "And nobody leaves my tables hungry, not on my watch." The silence that followed lasted about 4 seconds. It felt much longer. "Emily." He said her name like he was making sure he had heard it right, like he was storing it somewhere. "I can't let you do that." "You don't have a choice," she said simply. "It's already done. That's your money. I'm aware of that. You don't know us." She met his eyes. "You lost somebody today. You drove through a storm to get here. You were polite, you were respectful, and you ate everything on your plates." She paused. "That's enough for me to know." He stood there for a moment. This big, weathered man who had probably been in situations that would have broken most people, standing at a diner register in the middle of Arizona, being stared down by a 44-year-old waitress who had just handed over money she couldn't spare. He put out his hand. She shook it. "Jack Walker," he said. "Emily Carter. We'll pay you back." She smiled, the first real smile she'd let herself have all shift. "You don't have to. We will anyway." The other 4 men filed past on their way out. Each one of them made eye contact with her. Each one said something. "Thank you, God bless. I appreciate you." And each one meant it in the way that people mean things when words are all they have left to offer. The last one, the youngest, paused at the door. He looked like he was about 19, 20 at most. He had said nothing the entire meal. He said nothing now. He just looked at her for a moment with those red-rimmed eyes, and then he nodded once deep like a bow and walked out into the rain. Emily stood at the register and listened to the motorcycles start up one by one. Then they were gone. She went back to work. She cleared the booth. She wiped the table. She refilled the napkin holder and reset the salt and pepper. She told herself it was fine. She told herself she'd figure out the electric bill. She had figured things out before. She would figure it out again. What she didn't know was that Jack Walker, somewhere on the rain-soaked highway heading east toward Phoenix, was already on his phone. And the first person he called was the president of the Kingman chapter. And the second person he called was the president of the Flagstaff chapter. And the third call he made wasn't a call at all. It was a message, sent to a group chain that stretched across 7 states. Simple, factual, no dramatics. Tonight, a woman named Emily Carter at the Sunset Grill in Kingman covered our bill when we came up short after burying Martinez. She works double shifts. She's got a kid. She paid out of her own pocket without flinching. Her manager's been stealing from her wages. I think we need to remember this one. He hit send. Then he wrote. The next morning, Emily Carter arrived at work at 6:45 a.m. She hadn't slept much. The electric bill was still sitting on her kitchen counter next to a notice she'd been trying not to think about from Tyler's school about an upcoming field trip that cost $40 she didn't have. She put on her apron. She tied her hair back. She turned on the coffee maker and started rolling silverware into paper napkins the way she did every morning, listening to the hum of the diner finding its rhythm for the day. Carl Benson arrived at 8:00 a.m. Carl's was the manager. He had been the manager for 9 years. He was the kind of man who ran a diner the way a small person runs a small kingdom, with strict attention to every rule that benefited him and flexible attention to every rule that didn't. He was meticulous about the register. He watched the tickets like a hawk. He had written up 3 employees in the past year for giving free refills of orange juice without being asked. Emily had managed to avoid his worst side by being exceptionally good at her job. But she knew who he was. Everyone who worked there knew who he was. He came in that morning holding a piece of paper. He walked directly to where she was rolling silverware and set the paper on the counter in front of her. "You want to explain this," he said. She looked down. It was a printout of the previous night's receipts. Table 7, the big booth, had been paid in cash. The amount matched, but the ticket number had been flagged. "I covered a table's bill," she said. "They were short. With whose authorization in mind?" Carl's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. "This isn't a charity, Emily. I know what it is. You can't just decide to eat a $59 check because you felt like it." "It came out of my pocket," she said, "not the register." "That's not the point. The point is that you made a decision that affects this business without consulting. The point is that you set a precedent. The point," he picked up the paper, "is that I don't run this diner so that my staff can play Good Samaritan on my time." Emily put down the silverware. She looked at him evenly. "I paid for the meal myself," the register balanced. "There was no loss to the diner. I'm docking it from your paycheck." She stared at him. "You just said I paid for it myself." "I said there's a precedent issue. This is a formal warning. I'm documenting it. And I'm deducting the amount from this week's pay as a procedural penalty." "That's not legal, Carl." "You want to talk to me about legal?" He smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. "Go ahead, file a complaint. See how that works out for you." She said nothing. He tucked the paper under his arm and walked toward his office. At the door he turned. "I'd also strongly suggest that you think carefully about whether this job is still a good fit for you, because I've been thinking about it and I'm not entirely sure it is." The door closed. Emily stood at the counter with her hands flat on the surface, breathing slowly through her nose. Behind the pass-through, she could see Darnell watching her. He'd heard everything. He looked furious in the way young men look furious when they're powerless, jaw-tight eyes, hard doing nothing because there was nothing to do. She picked up the silverware. She kept rolling. Across Arizona, Nevada, Utah, California, New Mexico, Texas, and Colorado, Jack Walker's message was being read, and the replies were coming in. "Who is this manager? Somebody find out more about this diner. Iron, you got details on the wage thing. We should ride. When 3 days. I'll make some calls. I'm in. Same. Count Flagstaff in. Denver sending 12. We're in from Vegas. How many we talking total?" Jack Walker read the messages from the road. He didn't answer all of them. He didn't need to. The network was already moving the way it always moved, not with announcements, not with formal organization, but with the particular momentum of a community that has decided something needs to happen and is simply making it happen. He pulled into a gas station outside Wickenburg, filled the tank, and sat on his bike for a moment. I thought about a 44-year-old woman rolling silverware in an empty diner at 6 in the morning, paying for other people's meals out of an apron pocket that probably never had enough in it. He thought about the way she hadn't hesitated. He pulled back onto the highway. 3 days. Emily worked the double shift Wednesday. She worked it Thursday. She didn't tell anyone about Carl's warning. She didn't tell Tyler about the paycheck deduction because Tyler already carried too much for a 16-year-old. She went home each night, sat at her kitchen table for a while, and then went to bed. On Thursday night, she did something she hadn't done in a long time. She sat down with a piece of paper and a pen, and she wrote out every single bill she owed, every amount, every due bill, date. She looked at the total for a long time. Then she folded the paper, put it in the kitchen drawer, and told herself, not for the first time and not for the last time, that she would find a way. She always found a way. She turned off the kitchen light. She went to bed. And 30 miles away on a desert highway that stretched flat and dark toward the horizon, headlights appeared. First 2, then 10, then 50, then more. Riding in formation, riding in silence, riding through the Arizona night toward a small town called Kingman, and a diner called Sunset Grill, and a woman named Emily Carter, who had no idea they were coming, no idea at all. She thought it was over. She thought she had done a small thing for 5 strangers, paid a price for it, and moved on. She had no way of knowing that kindness, real kindness, the kind that costs you something, doesn't disappear. It travels. And sometimes what comes back for it is bigger than anything you could have imagined. The headlights came first. That was how it always started. Not with noise, not with announcement, but with light, cutting through darkness on a highway that most people in Kingman, Arizona had already stopped paying attention to. Light means movement. Movement means something is coming. And at 3:00 a.m. on a Friday morning in a town where nothing much happened after 9 o'clock, movement meant everything. But Emily Carter wasn't awake to see it. She was asleep on the couch with her shoes still on, which meant she'd come home from her second double shift of the week, sat down for just a moment, and never made it to the bedroom. Her phone was face down on the cushion beside her. The kitchen light was still on. The bill drawer was still slightly open from Thursday night, the folded piece of paper still inside it, the numbers still the same. Tyler had covered her with a blanket at some point. He hadn't woken her. He'd just done it quietly, the way kids do when they've learned to read a parent's exhaustion and understand without being told that some nights you just let people sleep. He was 16. He shouldn't have had to know how to do that yet, but he did. And Emily, even unconscious, even bone-tired, even with $60 missing from her next paycheck and a formal warning sitting in Carl Benson's filing cabinet with her name on it, Emily Carter was still the woman who had looked at 5 grieving strangers and said, "Nobody leaves my tables hungry." That hadn't changed. What was changing quietly, rapidly, across 7 states in the dark, was everything else. Jack Walker hadn't slept either. He'd made it back to Phoenix sometime after midnight and sat at his kitchen table the way men like him sit when something is working through them, still on the outside, moving fast on the inside. The message he'd sent had been simple. He hadn't expected what came back. Within 6 hours of sending it, his phone had received over 200 replies. Not expressions of sympathy, not just acknowledgement. Plans, real logistical moving parts plans from chapter presidents and road captains across the Southwest, who had read what he wrote and responded the way the community responded when something landed right in the center of what they believed. He hadn't asked anyone to do anything. He'd stated facts, and the facts had done the rest. By Thursday morning, the group chain was coordinating departure times, fuel stops, rest points, and routes. By Thursday evening, the number wasn't 20 or 30 riders. It wasn't even 100. Someone had done a rough count of confirmed riders and sent it to the chain. The number was 720. Jack had read that number twice. Then he'd set the phone down and looked at the ceiling for a long moment. 720 people from Arizona, Nevada, Utah, California, New Mexico, Texas, Colorado, men who had never met Emily Carter, men who had never been inside the Sunset Grill, Men who had heard one story from one source and decided without deliberation, without committee, without anyone telling them that they were going to show up. Because in their world, respect was not a concept, it was a practice. It was something you demonstrated concretely in person with your body physically present. You showed up. That was the rule. You showed up for funerals. You showed up for brothers in trouble. You showed up for strangers who had treated your people with dignity when they had no reason to. You showed up, and they were coming. The chapter president of the Phoenix chapter, a man named Ruiz, who had been writing for 31 years, had called Jack directly around 2 in the morning. Iron, he said, this woman know anything about what's coming? No, Jack said. You sure about that? I'm sure. Ruiz was quiet for a moment. We need to keep it that way. This isn't a show. This isn't a photo opportunity. We do this right. We do this clean. Understood. Understood. And the manager's situation, you said something about wage theft. That's what I heard from 2 people who used to work there, Jack said. Docking pay without documentation, threatening people when they push back. She's not the only one he's done it to. Another silence on the line, longer. We have a friend of the court, Ruiz said. Labor attorney, good man, I'll make a call. Jack nodded even though no one could see him. Appreciate it. Don't thank me yet, Ruiz said. Thank me after. The call ended. Jack Walker leaned back in his chair. He thought about the way Emily Carter had said it, not loudly, not looking for credit, just flatly and firmly, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Nobody leaves my tables hungry. I thought about his own mother, 20 years gone, a woman who had worked 2 jobs her entire adult life and never once complained about it where anyone could hear. He thought about the way that kind of person, the Emily Carters of the world, moved through their days invisible, giving, absorbing, managing, and being taken for granted by everyone around them who couldn't see past their own comfort. I thought about Carl Benson docking $60 from a paycheck that probably didn't have $60 to spare. He picked up his phone and sent one more message to the chain. We arrive before sunrise. We wait for her. We let her come to us. The replies came back in under a minute. Copy. Confirmed. We'll be there. See you in Kingman. Across the desert, engines that had been resting through the night began to warm up again. And in a diner on Route 66, Carl Benson arrived at work at 8:00 a.m. on Friday with no idea that any of this had happened. He poured himself a coffee, opened the register, checked the Friday supply order, and began his day with the particular confidence of a man who has never been held accountable for anything and has therefore stopped believing he ever will be. He passed Emily in the hall near the supply closet. He didn't say good morning. She didn't say it either. She went to her station. She started her prep. She was rolling silverware when Linda, the other morning waitress, 53 years old, 12 years at the diner, a woman who had watched Carl dock 3 of her own paychecks over the years and said nothing because she had a mortgage and a sick husband and couldn't afford to lose the job, slid in beside her and dropped her voice. You hear anything this morning? Linda asked. Emily looked up. Like what? I don't know. I drove past the highway coming in and I saw motorcycles, a lot of motorcycles, like parked off the road near the rest stop. I thought maybe it was a rally or something, but she paused. It was early for a rally. Emily frowned. I didn't see anything. How'd you come in? The back road. Tyler dropped me. Linda looked like she wanted to say something else, but wasn't sure what. She shook her head slowly. Probably nothing, just seemed like a lot. Emily nodded and went back to the silverware. She had no frame of reference. She had no reason to connect motorcycles on a highway to the 5 men she had fed 3 nights ago. She had spent those 3 days focused entirely on the immediate getting through each shift, managing the deduction from her paycheck, keeping Tyler from seeing how worried she was, and quietly rehearsing in her head whether she had grounds to file a complaint against Carl, and whether filing that complaint would cost her the job she couldn't afford to lose. She hadn't thought about Jack Walker since the morning after. She hadn't thought about the 5 men. She had done what she did and she had moved on because that was what she did. You gave what you had, you absorbed the consequence, and you kept moving. That was the system she had built for surviving. It had never occurred to her that the system might break. It had never occurred to her that someone somewhere might have noticed. At 9:22 a.m., Darnell pushed open the kitchen door and leaned into the dining room. His face was doing something unusual. Darnell was 22 and had exactly 2 expressions, neutral and mildly irritated. What was on his face right now was neither of those things. Emily, he said. She looked up from table 4. You need to come outside. I'm in the middle of Emily. His voice had something in it she had never heard from him. Not urgency exactly, something closer to awe. Come outside. She put down the coffee pot. She walked through the kitchen. She pushed open the back door. She stopped. The sound hit her before the sight did, a low collective mechanical rumble that she felt in her chest before she understood what she was hearing. Then her eyes adjusted. Then she understood. Motorcycles, not a few, not a dozen, hundreds, lining the road in front of the diner, extending in both directions farther than she could see from where she was standing. Riders standing beside their bike's helmet and hand jackets on patches visible. Row after row after row of people who had driven through the night from places she would never visit to be standing in front of a roadside diner in Kingman, Arizona at 9 o'clock on a Friday morning. All of them quiet, all of them waiting. Emily stood in the doorway and for a moment she could not move. Not because she was frightened, because she was completely unable to process what she was seeing. Her brain kept trying to file it under something familiar and failing. Linda appeared beside her. Oh my God, Linda whispered. Emily said nothing. Then she saw Jack Walker walking toward her from the front of the crowd. He looked exactly the same as he had. Tuesday night, same jacket, same steady walk, same eyes that held things without showing them. He stopped about 6 feet away from her. Morning, Emily, he said. She stared at him. What is this? We talked about paying you back. I told you, I know what you told us. He wasn't apologizing. He wasn't being aggressive. He was just stating it simply the way she had stated it to him 3 nights ago. We had a different idea. She looked out at the rows of bikes, at the hundreds of people, at the stillness of it, the deliberateness, the way it had clearly been organized and coordinated and brought together with real intention. How many people are out there? She asked. 720. She turned back to him. 720 people drove here. From 7 states. Yes. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Overnight, he added, not to show off, just because it was true. Behind her, she heard Carl Benson's voice before she heard his footsteps. What in the... He pushed through the back door and stopped short when he saw the crowd. His face went through several expressions very quickly. Emily, what is going on? What did you do? I don't know, she said honestly. This is private property. This is a place of business. I'm going to call Carl. Jack Walker said the name without raising his voice. He said it the way you say a word when you want someone to understand that you are paying very close attention to them. He looked at the manager steadily. We're here peacefully. We're here to support one of your employees, that's all. Carl pulled himself up. He was not a small man, but he looked small right now. I don't know who you are. Jack Walker, Phoenix chapter. A pause. You might want to call your boss before you do anything else. The blood left Carl Benson's face so fast it was almost audible. He went back inside. Emily watched him go. Then she turned back to Jack. He's going to try to blame this on me. Let him try, Jack said. And for the first time, she saw something in his expression that was close to a smile. We also brought someone else. He turned slightly and gestured. A man Emily had never seen before stepped forward. Mid-50s, civilian clothes, carrying a briefcase. He put out his hand. Mrs. Carter, my name is David Ramos. I'm a labor attorney. He spoke calmly, precisely. I've spent the last 24 hours reviewing accounts from several former and current employees of this establishment. I have a significant amount of documentation to discuss with you when you're ready. At no cost to you. Emily looked at the attorney. She looked at Jack Walker. She looked at the 720 people standing in the road in front of her diner. She felt something happening in her chest, not tears, not quite, but the pressure that comes before them. The particular pressure of someone who has been carrying something alone for so long that the moment another person reaches out to take some of the weight, the body doesn't know whether to feel relief or collapse entirely. She breathed through it. Why, she said, not to anyone specific, just to the situation, to the morning, to the inexplicable fact of it all. Jack understood the question. Because you did something real, he said. You treated 5 grieving men like human beings when you had no reason to and nothing to gain from it. That matters to us. He paused. It matters a lot. Inside the diner, Emily could hear Carl on the phone. His voice was escalating. She caught fragments, liability, disruption. I don't know how many. and she could tell from the pitch of it that whoever he was talking to was not responding the way he wanted. Linda had gone very still beside her. After a moment, she said quietly, not looking at Emily, "He docked mine too, 3 times. I never said anything." Emily looked at her. "I have the records," Linda said. "I kept them. I didn't know why I kept them. I kept them." David Ramos heard this. He turned to Linda with the calm, practiced attention of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment. "Would you be willing to speak with me this morning?" Linda looked at the attorney. She looked at the crowd outside. She looked at Emily. "Yes," she said, "I would." The front door of the diner opened. The diner owner, a man named Harold Pruitt, who was 67 years old and had owned the Sunset Grill for 22 years, but who left the day-to-day operations entirely to Carl and visited maybe twice a year, walked in with his coat still buttoned from the parking lot. He had clearly driven here in a hurry. His face was pale and set. He looked at Emily. He looked at the attorney. He looked through the window at the crowd outside. He looked at Carl, who had just appeared from the back hallway, still holding his phone. "Carl," Harold Pruitt said, "go home." Carl went very still. "Harold, if you'll let me explain what happened." "I said go home." His voice was quiet. That specific kind of quiet that doesn't need volume. "We'll talk later. Go home now." Carl looked at Emily. For a moment, she thought he was going to say something. Whatever it was, he thought better of it. He got his jacket from the office. He walked out the front door without looking at anyone and got into his car and drove away. Harold Pruitt turned to Emily. He looked at her for a long moment. She didn't look away. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I should have been paying more attention to what was happening here." Emily said nothing. "I'd like to make it right, if you'll let me." Outside, the crowd was beginning to move, not leaving but organizing. Chapter representatives were approaching the door with envelopes, with documents, with handwritten letters from writers who had never been to Kingman and never would be again, but who had read a single message on a Thursday night and decided that showing up was the right thing to do. An envelope for Emily, a scholarship fund for Tyler, mortgage assistance, medical support, car repair vouchers, contributions that had been pooled across 7 states by people who had never met her and asked nothing in return. Emily Carter stood in the doorway of the Sunset Grill and looked at all of it. She had given $60 she couldn't afford. She had taken a warning she didn't deserve. She had kept rolling silverware and kept showing up and kept telling herself she would find a way. She had found a way. It just looked nothing like what she expected. One of the chapter presidents, a woman Emily noticed with some surprise, a short, compact woman with silver-streaked hair and a jacket covered in patches, who introduced herself as Maria from the Albuquerque chapter, handed Emily a folded piece of paper. "Open it later," Maria said, "when you're alone." Emily took it. "What is it?" Maria smiled. "A number. The total of what's in the envelope." She paused. "I just didn't want you falling over in front of everyone." Emily looked down at the folded paper. She did not open it, not yet. She tucked it into her apron pocket, the same pocket she'd reached into on Tuesday night when she pulled out 3 $20 bills for 5 strangers in the rain, and she stood up straight and she looked out at 720 people who had driven through the night to stand in the road for a woman they'd never met. And she said nothing because there was nothing she could say that would fit what she was feeling. But she didn't have to say anything. They already knew. Emily didn't open the folded paper until 11:47 that night. She knew she was stalling. She knew it the way you know when you're standing outside a doctor's office holding test results. The knowing is already there somewhere underneath the skin, and the only thing the paper does is make it real. Make it a number you can't unfeel once you felt it. So she waited. She waited through the morning, through the slow, impossible unreality of standing in the road outside the Sunset Grill, while 720 people organized themselves with a quiet, purposeful efficiency that she had never seen outside of a military documentary. She waited through Harold Pruitt bringing her a cup of coffee and sitting across from her at table 4 with his hands folded and his voice low, saying things she had needed to hear for 7 years and was only now getting to hear because a storm had blown 5 men through her door on a Tuesday night. She waited through David Ramos taking statements from Linda in the corner booth, through the chapter presidents coming in one by one to introduce themselves and hand her envelopes. She tucked immediately into the pocket of her apron because looking at them would have broken something open in her that she wasn't ready to have broken open yet. She waited through Tyler arriving at noon. That was the hardest part. She had called him at 10 when the crowd was still there, when it was clear this was not going to be a brief, manageable thing that she could process and file away before her son needed to know about it. She called him and she said simply, "I need you to come to the diner." He asked why. She said she'd explain when he got there. He borrowed a neighbor's bike and rode 3 miles in the heat. She saw him before he saw her. He was standing at the edge of the crowd on the road, 16 years old, lanky, wearing the blue t-shirt he always wore on days off his mother's same dark eyes, and he was turning his head slowly, left to right, trying to make sense of what he was looking at. She watched him stop. She watched him count or try to count the rows of motorcycles stretching in both directions. She watched him realize that counting wasn't going to work. Then he found her face in the crowd. He walked straight to her, not looking at anyone else. "Mom," he stopped in front of her. "What did you do?" She almost laughed. "I bought 5 people dinner." He stared at her. He looked out at the crowd. He looked back at her. He was working hard to hold his face together, the way teenagers do when they don't want to be seen feeling something. "This is because of that," he said, apparently. I was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. "Are you okay?" "Yeah, baby," she said. "I really am." He nodded. He looked away. He pressed his lips together. And then, because he was 16, and because he had spent 2 years watching his mother absorb things she shouldn't have had to absorb alone, and because this was the first time in those 2 years that the world had given her something back, instead of taking something away, because of all of that, Tyler Carter turned slightly to the side so she couldn't see his face fully, and he cried, quietly, just for a moment, his shoulders moving, his jaw clenched, trying to get through it fast before anyone noticed. Emily put her arm around him and held on. Jack Walker was standing nearby and chose that exact moment to become extremely interested in something on the far side of the parking lot. When Tyler pulled himself back together, he scrubbed his face with the back of his hand and straightened up and said with the practiced nonchalance of someone trying to recover their dignity, "So what happens now?" "I don't entirely know," Emily said. That attorney, he nodded toward David Ramos, who was still in the corner booth, still with Linda, now with 2 other former employees who had shown up after someone in the crowd made a phone call to someone who made a phone call. "He's working on something. Apparently Carl's been stealing wages, not just from me." Tyler absorbed this. "For how long?" "Don't know yet," David said, "possibly years." Another pause. Tyler looked at Carl's empty parking space, his manager's spot, which was now occupied by a truck belonging to one of the chapter members from the Tucson chapter. "Where is he now?" "Harold sent him home." "Is he fired?" "I don't know, Tyler, but he should be." Emily looked at her son, at the certainty in his face, that clean, uncomplicated, 16-year-old moral clarity that adults spend years complicating. "Yeah," she said, "he should be." Tyler nodded once satisfied. Then he rolled up his sleeves and looked at her. "You need help bussing tables. This many people out front, you're going to run out of coffee." Emily stared at him. He shrugged. "I know how the machine works." She pointed him toward the back. He went. And she stood there for just one more moment, watching her son push through the kitchen door with purpose. And she let herself feel very briefly and very privately that maybe the world was not entirely what the bill drawer said it was. Then she went back to work. Because that was what Emily Carter did. Inside the diner, Harold Pruitt was having a different kind of morning. He'd been sitting with David Ramos for 45 minutes by the time he emerged from the corner booth, looking like a man who had just seen an invoice for something he didn't know he had ordered. His face was not quite pale. It was something more specific than pale, the particular color of someone calculating damage in real time and not liking the numbers. David had laid it out methodically. 7 current employees, 11 former, wage deductions totaling across those 18 people somewhere between $40,000 and $60,000 over the past 4 years, with earlier records suggesting it went back further than that. Verbal threats documented by multiple witnesses. Payroll discrepancies in the diner's own books that Carl had apparently assumed no one with any authority would ever look at. He'd been right about that. Until now. "How did I not know this?" Harold said. He was not asking David, he was asking himself, or the table, or the 22 years he'd owned in the diner and trusted the wrong man to run it. David answered anyway because it was the answer Harold needed to hear. People don't report when they believe reporting will cost them more than staying quiet. He counted on that. It's a very deliberate system. Harold looked out at Emily, who was refilling coffees at a table full of bikers, with the same steady efficiency she'd probably had since her first day. She worked for me for 7 years, he said. Yes. 7 years and I never. He stopped, shook his head. What do I need to do? Cooperate fully with the review, restore wages, and make sure your attorney understands that cooperation is your position from the start, not something you arrive at after being pushed. David closed his folder. The writers who came here today have significant reach. This story is already being shared. How you respond in the next 48 hours will matter considerably. Harold looked out the window at 720 people standing peacefully in the road in front of his diner on a Friday morning. Yeah, he said quietly. I imagine it will. He stood up, straightened his jacket, and walked to where Emily was standing at the counter. Emily, he said. She turned. I want to restore your deducted wages, all of them. Not just this week's. I want to go back through the full records. Whatever Carl took from you, it comes back. She looked at him steadily. And Linda and the others, he didn't hesitate. All of them. A beat. And his job, she asked. Carl won't be returning to this property. He said it flatly. No drama, just finality. I should have been paying closer attention. That's on me, but he's done. Emily nodded slowly. She wasn't triumphant about it. She wasn't visibly satisfied in the way that people expect from movie moments like this one. She just nodded because it was the right outcome, and she recognized it as such, and then she said, there's a table of 8 in the back that's been waiting on a coffee refill. Harold blinked. You want to help grab the pot? She moved the coffee carafe towards him across the counter. Darnell needs someone to run food, and Tyler's on busing. Harold Pruitt looked at the coffee carafe. He looked at Emily. He looked briefly like a man trying to remember the last time someone had handed him a task without negotiation. Then he picked up the carafe and walked to the back. The diner, the struggling, cracked vinyl buzzing sign. Sunset Grill had not seen this much foot traffic in years. Word had moved through the crowd outside that the kitchen was open, and riders who had been on the road since midnight were filtering in 2 and 3 at a time, ordering eggs and toast and coffee and leaving tips that in some cases exceeded the bill by a factor of 4 or 5. Darnell, who had started the day expecting a slow Friday, was cooking with the focused intensity of someone who understood that this morning was different, that this morning meant something, and who was handling it the only way he knew how, by making sure every plate was right. At one point, somewhere around the 2-hour mark of the crowd's presence, a woman named Rosa, who ran the Flagstaff chapter, walked up to the counter and placed a large envelope next to Emily's register. This is the scholarship fund, she said, for your son. Emily looked at the envelope. She did not pick it up. How much is in it? Rosa told her. Emily put both hands flat on the counter. That's not possible, she said. 43 chapters contributed, Rosa said. Some people gave $20. Some people gave more. It adds up. Emily looked toward the kitchen door behind which Tyler was currently loading a bus tub with the focused obliviousness of someone who had no idea what was happening 8 feet away from him. He wanted to skip college, she said. Not to Rosa specifically, just out loud because it was suddenly very important to say it out loud. He told me last month he didn't want me to worry about tuition. He was going to look for work after graduation. Rosa was quiet for a moment. Well, she said, now he doesn't have to. Emily picked up the envelope. She held it in both hands. She stood at the register of the diner where she had worked for 7 years for wages that were being stolen, and with a manager who treated her like a liability, and with bills that never quite got paid on time, and with a son who shouldn't have had to think the way he was thinking. And she held that envelope, and she breathed, and she did not fall apart because Emily Carter did not fall apart. That was not the system she had built, but she bent just slightly, just enough that anyone watching would have understood everything. Jack Walker was watching. He was sitting at the counter 3 seats down, working through a plate of eggs, and he was watching the way a man watches something that confirms something he already believed. He had been thinking about the other members of his chapter who hadn't been with them that Tuesday night. He'd been thinking about the ones back home who had asked him after he sent the message. What was it about her? There must be something specific. And he hadn't known how to explain it precisely except to say she didn't hesitate. That was it. That was the whole thing. In a world where everyone hesitates, where everyone weighs, calculates, considers the cost before they act, Emily Carter had not hesitated for one single second, and that he thought was rarer than people understood. He finished his eggs. He left a 50 on the counter. He stood up and put on his jacket. He found Emily at the end of the counter. We're going to start heading out in about an hour, he said. Let people get some rest before the ride back. She nodded. Jack. She said his name carefully. I want you to know something. He waited. I would have done it again, she said. Even knowing everything that came after the warning, Carl, the paycheck. I would have done it exactly the same way. He looked at her for a moment. I know, he said. I just wanted you to know that I didn't do it for this. She gestured vaguely at the crowd, the envelopes, the morning that had rewritten everything. I did it because it was the right thing. That's why it worked, he said simply. He put out his hand. She shook it. Same as Tuesday, except this time it was different in the way that everything was now different, not louder, not bigger, just permanently shifted, like furniture moved in the night that you keep walking into because your body remembers where it used to be. Over the next hour, riders filtered out in groups. They came by to say goodbye, not all 720 of them, but enough. Some shook her hand, some nodded. A few of the older ones said things briefly and directly the way people speak when they have learned that most situations don't require many words. One man weathered white-haired patches she didn't recognize, stopped in front of her, looked at her for a long moment and said, My wife waitressed for 30 years. Good woman, never got anything like this. He paused. She deserved it just as much as you do. Emily didn't know what to say to that. Thank you, she said. He nodded and walked out. By 2 in the afternoon, the road was clearing. The sound of engines ebbed and flowed for a long time, waves of it. Each wave, a group heading back to Arizona, Nevada, Utah, wherever they'd come from, until eventually the last of it faded. The street was quiet again. The Sunset Grill, set on Route 66 the way it always had, a little crooked, a little worn, the sign still buzzing on the S. Nothing about the building had changed. Nothing about the cracked vinyl booths or the wobbly ceiling fan or the coffee maker that made the grinding noise. If you didn't press the filter down, exactly right. But something had changed. You could feel it in the way the remaining staff moved through the diner. Darnell, Linda, Tyler, Harold still hovering uncertainly near the back, a different kind of air. Lighter, like pressure that had been sitting on the building for years had lifted in a single morning. Emily sat down at the counter for the first time all day. Tyler brought her a coffee without being asked. She wrapped both hands around the mug. She pulled the folded paper out of her apron pocket, the one Maria from Albuquerque had given her that morning, the one she still hadn't opened, the number she still hadn't let herself see. She unfolded it. She read it. She folded it back up. She sat there for a moment with her coffee going warm in her hands and the quiet of the diner around her and the sound of nothing outside where 720 people had been standing 6 hours ago. Tyler leaned against the counter across from her. He was watching her with those dark eyes that were so much like her own. How much, he asked. She looked at her son. She thought about 2 years of watching him try not to burden her, about the way he'd covered her with a blanket when she fell asleep on the couch because she came home too tired to make it to bed, about him saying he'd look for work after graduation because he didn't want her to worry about tuition. She slid the paper across the counter to him. He read it. He put the paper down. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said very quietly, Mom, this is enough for school. I know, she said. This is enough, for this is more than... He stopped. He looked at her. All because you bought 5 guys dinner. She picked up her coffee. All because I did the right thing. She paused. Don't forget that part. Tyler looked at the paper one more time. He pushed it back across to her. He straightened up. He looked exactly like he was about to say something meaningful, and then thought better of it because he was 16, and meaningful things were still slightly embarrassing. Instead, he said, I'm going to go help Darnell close up. Okay, she said. He pushed off the counter and headed toward the kitchen. At the door, he stopped. He didn't turn around. Hey, Mom. Yeah, a beat. Good call on the dinner. He went through the door. Emily Carter sat at the counter of the Sunset Grill with her coffee and her folded piece of paper in the particular overwhelming, difficult to categorize feeling of someone who has been alone with something heavy for a very long time and has just unexpectedly been allowed to put it down. She didn't cry. She just sat and breathed. For the first time in a long time, she just breathed. The week after the crowd left was the strangest week of Emily Carter's life. Not because everything had changed, though it had. Not because the phone kept ringing with numbers she didn't recognize, though it did. Not because Harold Pruitt came in every single morning that week. Something he had not done in 7 years of owning the diner, though that too. The strangest part was the silence inside her own head. For years, Emily had operated with a constant low-level noise running underneath everything she did, a background frequency of calculation and worry and management that hummed along, whether she was working or sleeping or sitting at the kitchen table pretending she wasn't looking at the bill drawer. The noise was always there. How much is in the account? How many days until the electric bill? Can Tyler's shoes last another month? Is the car going to make it through winter? It was the sound of someone holding a structure together by sheer force of attention, and it never stopped, not even when she laughed, not even when she slept. That week, for the first time in longer than she could remember, the noise was quieter. Not gone. She wasn't naive enough to think one extraordinary morning had rewired everything. But quieter. Enough that she could hear other things, enough that when Tyler said something funny at breakfast, she could actually laugh instead of just performing the laugh while the back of her brain ran numbers. That was the change she hadn't expected. Not the money, not the legal case, not the diner suddenly busy with people who had heard the story and driven 2 hours to sit at Emily Carter's table. The change she hadn't expected was that she could breathe without doing math at the same time. She was still adjusting to it when David Ramos called on Monday morning. She was in the parking lot before her shift sitting in her car when her phone lit up with his name. Emily, he said, I need to update you on a few things. Do you have a minute? I have 5, she said. Shift starts at 7. I'll be quick. She heard him shuffle papers. This was a man who was always shuffling papers. We've completed our initial review of the payroll records. Carl Benson has been systematically deducting wages from staff paychecks since at least 2019. Some deductions were coded as procedural penalties, which is what he used with you. Others were simply removed from the records. We're looking at 18 affected employees. Total documented amount is currently sitting at $63,000. Emily was quiet. Emily, I heard you, she said. $63,000. At minimum, we may find more as we go further back. He did this for 5 years and nobody caught it. People reported it, David said, and his voice shifted slightly. Not harder but more precise, the way a lawyer's voice gets when he's making a point he wants remembered. 2 employees went to Harold Pruitt directly. One left a written complaint. Harold didn't act on it. She absorbed this. So Harold knew, she said. Harold was informed. Whether he knew in the way that implies responsibility is what we're currently working through. A pause. He's cooperating fully. That matters. But I want you to have the complete picture. She sat with that for a moment. Harold pouring coffee in her diner on Friday, saying I should have been paying closer attention, saying it's on me, and now this. The man who had apologized to her face had apparently received complaints and filed them away where they couldn't bother him. The apology was real. She believed that. But the apology and the accountability were 2 different things, and she was old enough to know that people could mean one sincerely while hoping to avoid the other. What happens to Carlin, she asked. He's been formally dismissed. Harold executed the termination over the weekend. But termination is separate from legal liability. We're currently preparing documentation for a wage theft claim. Carl will almost certainly be required to repay what was taken. Whether there are criminal charges depends on what the labor board determines about intent. And Harold, a beat, she noticed the beat. Harold's attorney has reached out to discuss a settlement structure for the affected employees. He wants this resolved quietly and quickly. David's voice stayed even. That may be in everyone's interest, or it may not be. I want you to think about what you want out of this, Emily, not what's easiest, but what's right, for you and for the others. She looked at the diner through her windshield. The sign was still buzzing on the S. What do the others want? She asked. Linda wants her money back in an apology from Harold in writing. Darnell wants his wages restored and a raise. The former employees want documentation they can use if they need to apply for back wages through the labor board. David paused. Nobody's asking for a war, they just want what was taken from them. Emily thought about Linda, saying, I have the records, I kept them, I didn't know why. Linda, who had been watching Carl do this for years and had kept silent because she had a mortgage and a sick husband and no margin for risk. Linda, who had finally spoken because 720 motorcycles had shown up on a Friday morning and changed the calculation. Make sure Linda gets the written apology, Emily said. That matters to her. I will. And Darnell gets the raise before any settlement is signed in writing. Part of the terms. Understood. And I want Harold to stand in front of every single person he failed to protect and say it to their face. Not a letter, not through attorneys, face to face. She paused. If he's serious about making it right, he can do that. David was quiet for a moment. That's an unusual ask, he said. I know. I'll put it to his attorney. Thank you, David. Emily, one more thing. He said it in the particular way that meant the one more thing was not a small thing. The story has gotten out. She closed her eyes briefly. I assumed it would. I mean significantly out. A journalist in Phoenix ran a piece on Friday night. By Sunday morning, it had been picked up by 2 national outlets. As of this morning, it's been shared approximately more paper shuffling 400,000 times across various platforms. She opened her eyes. 400,000, she said. The diner's phone number has been called so many times Harold had to forward it to a voicemail system. He has received, as of last count, over 2,000 messages. The majority are people wanting to visit, wanting to express support, or a pause, wanting to offer you things. What kind of things? Job offers, media appearances. One cable network left a message about a documentary. A morning talk show reached out through Harold's office. Another pause. And a woman in Tucson who owns a small chain of diners contacted Harold's attorney directly to say she'd like to offer you a management position at any location of your choosing with a starting salary she specified in the message. Emily said nothing for a long moment. How much, she finally said. David told her. She exhaled slowly through her nose. It was more than double what she currently made. It was more than she had ever made. It was the kind of number that had existed in a separate category from her life, the category of things that happened to other people. I don't know what to do with any of that, she said honestly. You don't have to decide anything right now, David said. But I wanted you to know what's in the room before other people start managing it for you. A pause. You should have a publicist, or at least someone who can help you sort through the legitimate offers from the ones that aren't. A publicist, she repeated, like the word was in a foreign language. Someone to answer the calls, screen the offers, protect your time. He said it matter-of-factly. This is what happens when a story lands the way this one has. People want access to you. Some of them want to help. Some of them want to use the fact that they helped you. You need to be able to tell the difference. She looked at the diner again. Through the window, she could see Darnell starting the coffee maker. She could see Linda tying her apron. Normal things, familiar things. The world she had built shift by shift and managed to hold together. I'll think about it, she said. That's all I'm asking. She went inside and started her shift. The diner was different now. That was simply a fact she had to work with. It was the same building, the same menu, the same cracked vinyl booths, but it was operating in a different atmosphere. One that had been created by a Friday morning that Kingman, Arizona had not seen before and would probably not see again. People came in who had driven from Flagstaff, from Las Vegas, from Tucson, from as far as Albuquerque. They sat at whatever table was available, and they ordered coffee and whatever Emily recommended, and they looked at her with the particular attention of people who have heard a story and want to see the person the story belongs to and confirm that she is real. She was real. She was tired. She was refilling coffees and running plates and smiling at strangers and trying to behave as though being looked at by everyone in the room was a normal condition of employment. It was not her natural state. On Wednesday, a woman came in alone, mid-60s, quiet. She sat at the counter, ordered a coffee and a slice of pie, and waited until the rush had thinned before she said anything. You don't know me, the woman said. My name is Patricia. I drove from Prescott this morning. Emily refilled her coffee. Long drive. I wanted to see you in person. Patricia wrapped both hands around her mug. My husband drove a rig for 22 years. Roadside diner on Route 40 used to be his regular stop. The woman who worked mornings there, she knew his order. She'd have his coffee ready before he got to the counter. When he got sick and the runs got harder for him, she'd let him rest in the back booth for an hour before he had to get back on the road. Never charged him, never told anyone. She paused. He died 4 years ago. I never got to thank her. Emily had gone still behind the counter. I came here because I wanted to say thank you to someone like her, Patricia said. I don't know if that makes sense. It makes sense, Emily said quietly. Patricia nodded. She drank her coffee. She ate her pie. When she left, she put a 20 on the counter for a $6 order, and she didn't wait for change. Emily watched her walk out. She stood at the counter for a moment with the 20 in her hand. She thought about every diner on every highway in America. She thought about every woman who had been doing what she did, carrying the weight of other people's worst and hardest moments, feeding them, steadying them, sending them back onto the road without anyone ever knowing, without any record, without anyone showing up to say, we see what you do and it matters. She put the 20 in the register. She picked up the coffee pot. She kept moving, but she thought about Patricia for the rest of the day. Thursday morning, Harold Pruitt came in with his attorney and asked Emily if she would be present for a meeting at 10 o'clock. She said yes. She arranged her tables to cover for the hour. At 10, Harold assembled the current staff in the back room. Emily Linda Darnell, two part-time servers that named Greg and Amara, and the part-time dishwasher, a 19-year-old named Felix, who had only worked there 8 months but whose wages had been docked twice in that time for reasons that had never been explained to him. Harold stood at the front of the room. His attorney was beside him, but Harold had clearly decided to do this part himself without notes, without the attorney speaking for him. He looked at each person individually. He didn't rush it. I owe every one of you an apology, he said. Not a corporate apology, not sure I'm doing all right thing. Through channel's apology. I owe you this directly. He paused. I was told about problems with how this staff was being treated. I was told more than once. I chose to believe the manager I had in place rather than the people doing the work. That was wrong. It was a failure of responsibility on my part, and the fact that I wasn't here day to day is not an excuse. It's an explanation, and there's a difference. Linda was sitting with her arms crossed. She had been sitting that way since she walked in. She did not uncross them. Harold looked at her specifically. Linda, you came to me personally 3 years ago. You handed me a written statement. I told you I would look into it. I did not look into it the way I should have. I'm sorry. That was a direct failure to protect you, and I know an apology doesn't restore what was taken from you. But I am saying it to your face because you deserve to hear it said that way. Linda looked at him for a long moment. Her jaw was tight. It doesn't fix it, she said. No, Harold agreed. It doesn't, but I appreciate that you said it without a lawyer doing it for you. He nodded. He moved through the rest of the staff, Darnell, Greg, Amara, Felix, giving each one his direct attention, his direct acknowledgement. When he reached Emily, he stopped. Emily, he said, you've been here 7 years. I don't know your coffee order. I don't know your son's name. I don't know that you took a formal warning 3 days before I found out everything because you acted with more decency than I deserve from you. He paused. I'm grateful you're still here. I don't think I've earned that. Emily looked at him steadily. My son's name is Tyler, she said. He's 16. He wants to study engineering, and I take my coffee black. Harold looked at her. Something shifted in his face, not quite relief, not quite absolution, something more complicated and more honest than either. Tyler, he said, engineering. He nodded slowly. I'll remember that. The meeting ended. The attorney laid out the settlement terms, wages restored, documented, raises formal, HR protocols implemented with third-party oversight. Each staff member signed. Each staff member received a copy. When Felix, the 19-year-old dishwasher, looked at the check representing his restored wages, 2 deductions over 8 months, which came to less than $200 total, he stared at it for a long time. Then he looked up. This is real, he said to David Ramos, who had been present to oversee. It's real, David said. Felix looked at Emily. This happened because of you. This happened because of a lot of people, she said. He shook his head slowly. He was 19 and he was doing the math of what this meant, that someone had stood up, that someone had not simply absorbed it and moved on, that the system had a crack in it and something had gotten through. I didn't even know you could fight this, he said. I thought that was just how jobs worked. Emily looked at this kid barely older than Tyler, who had spent 8 months accepting illegal deductions from his paycheck because he didn't know he had a choice. No, she said, clearly, that's not how jobs work. That's how people get away with things when nobody says anything. She paused. You can always say something. Felix nodded. He folded his check carefully and put it in his pocket. She watched him do it and thought about every Felix in every diner, in every job site, in every underpaid corner of the country, who had been told explicitly or implicitly that this was just how things worked. How many of them had believed it? How many of them were still believing it right now? The thought made her chest tight. It also made her, quietly and without fanfare, a little bit angry. Not the hot, combustible kind. The slow, purposeful kind that sits underneath action and powers it long after the emotion has settled. She was still carrying that anger when she got home Thursday evening and found Tyler at the kitchen table with a college catalog open in front of him and a pencil behind his ear. In the particular expression of someone doing something they had given up on and are now carefully and with some disbelief picking up again. He didn't look up when she came in. Arizona State has an engineering program, he said. So does NAU. I'm looking at the deadlines. She set her bag down. She sat across from him at the table. NAU is in Flagstaff, she said. I know, I looked up housing. It's not as bad as I thought. He turned a page. Rosa from the Albuquerque chapter, she emailed me. From the scholarship fund. She said there's an application process, but she thinks I'd qualify for the full amount. He finally looked up. Did you know she has a son who's a mechanical engineer? I didn't know that. She said to call her if I have questions about the program. He looked slightly stunned by this information, the way people look when the world unexpectedly behaves as though it is on their side. She gave me her number. Emily looked at her son across the kitchen table, at the open catalog, at the pencil behind his ear, at the 16-year-old who had covered his mother with a blanket and learned not to show her when he was worried and offered to skip college so she wouldn't have to worry about tuition. She thought about $59. She thought about what it cost, what it bought, what it had somehow impossibly led to this table, this boy, this catalog, this moment. Tyler, she said. He looked at her. Apply to both, she said, and apply to one more. Your choice. He looked at her for a moment, then he looked back at the catalog. He turned to the front page and started over from the beginning, this time without the invisible ceiling he'd been reading around for 2 years. Emily got up and started dinner. The bill drawer was still in the kitchen. She walked past it. She didn't open it. First time in longer than she could remember, she walked past it without calculating anything. That was enough. For tonight, that was more than enough. 6 months passed. The Sunset Grill did not become a different place. It became a better version of what it had always been. The same booths, the same coffee, the same Route 66 address. The GPS system still occasionally failed to locate correctly. But the staff had changed. The atmosphere had changed. The way people inside the building treated each other had changed in the specific, durable way that things change when everyone in a room has seen together what accountability actually looks like when it finally arrives. Harold Pruitt came in every Tuesday morning now. Without fail, he sat at the counter, ordered what Emily recommended, and stayed long enough to actually know what was happening in his own diner. He had learned Tyler's name. Han had learned that Darnell was taking night classes in culinary management. He had learned that Linda's husband had started a new medication that seemed to be working. He had learned these things because he had started showing up, and showing up, it turned out, was not complicated. It just required deciding to do it. Carl Benson's legal matter had moved through the system with the particular grinding slowness of labor board proceedings everywhere. David Ramos had been clear with Emily from the start. This would not be fast. What it would be was thorough. The documentation Linda had kept, those quiet, careful records maintained over years by a woman who had no reason to believe they would ever matter, turned out to be extraordinary. Dates, amounts, pay stubs with Carl's handwriting on the margin notations. A paper trail that a labor board investigator had described to David as among the cleaner cases he had reviewed in a decade. Carly had hired an attorney. His attorney had suggested he cooperate. He had not cooperated. His attorney had then suggested he cooperate more fully. He had cooperated more fully. David called Emily on a Wednesday morning in February with the outcome. Full repayment order, he said. All $63,000 distributed among the 18 affected employees, according to the documented amounts, plus penalties. His license to manage any food service establishment in the state has been suspended pending a separate review. A pause. There will be no criminal charges. The labor board found willful violation, but the threshold for criminal prosecution wasn't met. I want to be honest with you about that. Is that normal? She asked. More common than it should be, he said. But the civil order is enforceable, and the suspension is real. He won't be managing another diner in Arizona. Emily was quiet for a moment. She thought about what Felix had said. I didn't even know you could fight this. I thought that was just how jobs worked. She thought about how many people were still thinking that right now. How many Carl Bensons were running their small kingdoms in exactly the same way, counting on exactly the same silence? David, she said, what would it take to make sure people know they can fight it? He paused. What do you mean? I mean, what would it take to put together something? Information, resources, something that workers in situations like this could actually find and use. She was thinking out loud, feeling her way toward it. Not a lawsuit, not a campaign, just clear information. Here's what wage theft is. Here's what you can do. Here's who you can call. A long pause. That, David said, is actually something I've wanted to do for a long time. Could we do it together? Another pause. Longer. Yes, he said, I think we could. That conversation was the beginning of something neither of them had planned. Over the next 3 months, David drafted the framework. Emily provided the plain language review. She read every section and flagged anything that would have confused her 2 years ago before she knew any of this existed. They called it the Plain Rights Project, a simple website, a phone line staffed by volunteer attorneys 2 evenings a week, a one-page document available in English and Spanish that laid out in clear and direct terms what wage theft was, what it looked like, and exactly what steps a worker could take, starting from the moment they suspected it was happening. Rosa from the Albuquerque chapter shared it through the network. It moved the same way the story had moved fast, organically through communities that recognized its usefulness and passed it on without being asked. By the end of the 3rd month, the phone line had received calls from 11 states. Emily learned about this on a Tuesday evening when David sent her a text that said simply, 11 states, thought you should know. She read it, sitting at the kitchen table. Tyler was across from her working on an application essay for Northern Arizona University. He had applied to 3 schools. All 3 had responded with interest. Rosa's scholarship fund had been formally administered through a nonprofit the Phoenix chapter helped establish, and Tyler's eligibility had been confirmed in writing 3 weeks earlier. He was going to college. That was a fact now, not a hope, not a plan that depended on everything going right. A fact. She still hadn't entirely adjusted to it. She put the phone down and looked at her son bent over his essay pencil behind his ear, and she thought about the bill drawer. She hadn't opened it in a compulsive way since the Friday the crowd came. She still opened it because bills still existed, because life still had edges and costs and things that needed managing. But she opened it the way functional adults open drawers, practically briefly, without dread. The noise in her head had not disappeared, but it had become manageable, proportionate, the sound of someone running their life rather than surviving it. That was the real inheritance of that Tuesday night in the storm. Not the money, though the money had mattered enormously. Not the legal outcome, though justice had mattered too. It was this, the permanent internal recalibration of a woman who had spent years believing that her situation was simply the situation, fixed and immovable, and had learned through the most unexpected possible sequence of events that it was not. That things could move. That kindness sent into the world did not simply disappear. That sometimes it came back, and when it came back bigger than the thing you sent. She had not stopped being a waitress. She was still at the Sunset Grill. She had declined the management offer from the Tucson diner chain, politely with a handwritten note, because Kingman was her home, and the Sunset Grill was where she knew the people, and the people knew her, and there was a value to that which didn't translate into a salary figure. Harold had given her a raise and a title floor manager that came with a modest increase in hours and a meaningful increase in pay. It wasn't the Tucson offer. It was real, and it was hers, and it was in the town where her son had grown up and where she had built a life shift by shift and where she intended to stay. She had also declined the morning talk show. That one had been harder to decline than she expected. Not because she wanted to do it, but because the publicist, a woman named Karen that Jack Walker had actually recommended, a no-nonsense person who returned calls within the hour and spoke in plain sentences, had explained that appearing would amplify the Plain Rights Project significantly. More visibility meant more people calling the phone line. More people calling the phone line meant more workers getting information they needed. Emily had sat with that for 4 days. Then she called Karen. If I do it, she said, we talk about the project, the whole segment. That's the condition. I'll make it the condition, Karen said. If they won't agree to that, then we decline. I understand. The show agreed. Emily flew to New York her first time on a plane in 14 years and sat in a green room that was nicer than any room she had ever been in, wearing clothes that a stylist had brought in a garment bag and that Emily had looked at with the specific bewilderment of someone who has spent a decade in an apron. The stylist was a young woman named Bree, who talked constantly and was very good at her job, and who at one point while adjusting Emily's collar said, "I read about you in February. I cried on the subway. I don't usually do that." Emily looked at her in the mirror. "I'm sorry," Bree laughed. "Don't be. It was a good cry." She stepped back, assessed, adjusted one more time. "You look like someone who deserved a break." "I was just doing my job," Emily said. Bree met her eyes in the mirror. "That's what my mom says about her job. She's a home health aide. She's been saying that for 20 years. A pause. "People like you and my mom, you deserve more than you get. That's all." Emily thought about that all the way through hair and makeup and the pre-interview briefing. She thought about Bree's mother. She thought about Patricia from Prescott, who had driven to thank her for a woman she'd never met. She thought about every person behind the story who had never been part of the story, the ones doing the quiet, necessary, and visible work of holding other people's lives together without anyone noticing. The interview lasted 11 minutes. Emily talked about the night, about Tyler, about Carl and the wage theft, about David and the Plain Rights Project. She talked clearly and directly and without performance, which was all she knew how to do. The host, a woman who had clearly done her homework, asked at the end, "What do you want people to take away from what happened to you?" Emily thought for exactly 2 seconds. "That kindness isn't naive," she said. "People think kindness is soft, that if you're kind, you'll get taken advantage of. And sometimes you will." Carl took advantage of my work for years. But that's not a reason to stop. That's a reason to make sure people know their rights so they can be kind and protected at the same time. She paused. "And I want people to know that what those riders did, that was kindness too. Big, loud motorcycle kindness. It looked different from what I did, but it came from the same place. You see someone who needs something and you show up. That's all it is. You show up." The clip was shared 600,000 times in 48 hours. The Plain Rights phone line received more calls in the following week than it had in the previous 3 months combined. Karen sent Emily a text that said, "You were born to do that. Don't tell me you weren't." Emily sent back, "I was born to wait tables. That just happened." Karen sent back a laughing emoji, and then both can be true. She was right. Both were true. The first anniversary of the Friday the Crowd Came was a Saturday in late spring. Jack Walker had called Emily in March to tell her what the chapters were planning. He explained it simply the way he explained most things. "We're organizing a ride, annual charity. We're calling it the $59 ride. Proceeds go to struggling families, veterans, service workers in hard situations, people like the ones you've been helping through the project." A pause. "We'd like you to be there, if you want to be." She had said yes without deliberating. The ride assembled at a fairground outside Kingman. More than 1,000 riders this time. The chapters had spread the word through the same network that had moved Jack's message across 7 states the year before, and it had moved the same way fast, person to person, without a marketing budget or a press release, simply because people had decided it mattered and told other people it mattered. Emily arrived with Tyler. I was taller than she remembered, which was something that kept happening. She would look at him, and he would have somehow gotten taller since she last looked. He was wearing a button-down shirt, which meant he understood this was a significant occasion, and he was carrying himself with the quiet confidence of a young man who knew where he was going, which was Northern Arizona University, in the fall on a full scholarship to study mechanical engineering. Jack met them at the entrance. He shook Tyler's hand first, looked at him seriously. "Your mother tells me you're going to be an engineer." "Yes, sir," Tyler said. "Good." He said it the way he said most things, flat, direct, meaning it. "We need more engineers who know where they came from." Tyler nodded. He had the look of a young man filing something away carefully. Jack turned to Emily. "You ready for this?" "I don't know what I'm supposed to be ready for," she said. "Stage, microphone, 1,000 people." He said it without drama. "You've handled worse." "I haven't, actually." "You handled Carl Benson for 7 years. This is better." She laughed. It surprised her, not the laugh itself, but how easy it came. A year ago, she had not been a person who laughed easily. She was becoming one, slowly and perfectly on her own timeline, but becoming one. Rosa was there. She found Tyler within 5 minutes of their arrival and immediately began talking to him about NAU's engineering department with the focused enthusiasm of a woman who had been waiting months for this conversation. Tyler, who was 16, almost 17 now, and therefore constitutionally obligated to seem unimpressed by most things, was visibly impressed. Emily watched them from across the space and felt something she did not have a precise word for, a warmth that was also a kind of grief. The particular emotion of watching your child step toward a future you weren't sure you'd be able to give them, and realizing that they are going to be fine, more than fine, that they have people now, a network, a community that appeared from nowhere and is real. She was still standing there when Maria from Albuquerque appeared beside her. "How does it feel?" Maria asked. Emily considered the question honestly. "Strange," she said. "I keep expecting to go back to how things were." "Do you miss it?" Emily looked at her. "The struggling, the simplicity, when it was just you and the problem and the shift." Emily thought about this carefully because Maria was asking something real and deserved a real answer. "Sometimes," she said, "not the fear, but the clarity of it. When you're that close to the edge, every decision is obvious. You just do what needs to be done, and you don't second guess it because there's no room to." Maria nodded slowly. "That's what people saw in you, that clarity." "I was just tired," Emily said. "Being tired and being clear aren't mutually exclusive," Maria said. "Sometimes exhaustion strips everything down to what actually matters. You had that. You still have it." She paused. "Don't let the bigger life complicate it." Emily stood with that for a moment. Then she nodded. When she took the stage, the crowd went quiet so completely and so quickly that it startled her. Not the noise of applause, there was applause, and it was significant, but the way the quiet followed it. 1,000 people standing still waiting. She stood at the microphone. She looked out at the crowd riders, families, community members, people she recognized, and people she didn't, all of them connected by a chain of events that had started with a storm, and 5 hungry men, and $60 she couldn't afford, and the simple, stubborn refusal to let anyone leave her table hungry. She had prepared something to say. She had written it out on a notepad and rehearsed it twice, which was 2 more times than she had rehearsed anything in recent memory. She did not use it. She put the notepad in her pocket and she spoke. "I've been trying to figure out what to say for 3 weeks," she said. "I had notes. I'm not using them because I think what I actually want to say is simpler than what I wrote down." She paused. "A year ago, I fed 5 people dinner. I did it because it was right. I got punished for it by a man who thought he could get away with anything as long as the people around him didn't believe they had any options. And then 720 of you showed up and reminded me, and him, and every person watching that when one person acts with integrity, other people notice. Even if it takes a few days. Even if the person doesn't know they're being watched." She looked out at the crowd. "I didn't change your lives. I only know that. I bought 5 meals and you changed mine." She heard the crowd, not applause, not yet, something quieter and more immediate than applause. "The $59 ride isn't about me," she said. "It's about every person who has been doing the right thing without recognition. The ones who cover the bill, who keep the records, who stay quiet when they should be loud, and then find the courage to stop being quiet. Every Linda in every diner, every Felix who didn't know he had rights, every kid who thinks they can't go to college, every mother who walks past a bill drawer every night and tells herself she'll find a way." She stopped. "You'll find a way, I promise you. You'll find a way." The applause, when it came, was the kind that starts in the chest before it reaches the hands. Tyler was standing at the side of the stage. She could see him from where she was. He was not trying to hold his face together this time. He was just standing there, letting whatever he felt show the way people let things show. When they have learned that feeling things is not a weakness. She stepped back from the microphone. Jack Walker was standing near the stage steps. She came down and he handed her a coffee black, no explanation. Just handed it to her and she took it, and they stood side by side for a moment looking out at the crowd beginning to move and talk again. The energy of 1,000 people who had come from 7 states to ride in honor of a meal that cost $59. "Same time next year," he said. She looked out at all of it. At Tyler talking to Rosa. At Darnell, who had driven out with his girlfriend and was standing near the food truck looking genuinely happy. At Linda, who had come with her husband, who was having a good day. and who was standing in the sun with her face turned up toward it, the way people stand in the sun when they have spent too long inside. At all of it. Same time next year, Emily said. She drank her coffee. Some people change the world with speeches and with strategy and with money and with power. And some people change it the way Emily Carter changed it, by reaching into an apron pocket on a rainy Tuesday night and deciding without hesitation and without audience and without any expectation of return that the right thing was simply the right thing. $59. That was the price of everything that followed. And the lesson was not that kindness is rewarded. The lesson was not that good things happen to good people. The world is too complicated and too often unfair for lessons that clean. The lesson was this: when you act from your truest self, when you do the right thing, not because anyone is watching, but because it is who you are, you send something into the world that carries farther than you know. It moves through networks you will never see. It touches people you will never meet. It lands in places you will never visit. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes it comes back to you, 720 strong,